Mary Shelley writes of two men, one an intellectual capable of creating life from death, the other a grotesque creature made of human body parts and covered in scars. But it isn't the obvious monster that we have to be afraid of. It's the one that looks like us and acts like us. Mary Shelley's message was clear. Real monsters aren't the ones created by man. The real monster is man himself. Am I wearing the same outfit I did a few videos back? Yes I am. Is that because I spend more money on books than clothes? Mind your business. Hello friends, welcome to the Eerie Fairy Tales. My name is Letty, and today we're going to do my August wrap-up. Yes, I am getting caught up just a little bit. Hopefully I'll be caught up by the time the October wrap-up is due. So this one, then my September wrap-up, and I actually just got tagged in a couple more tag videos, so those will be coming as well. So just a few stats. In August, I read 10 books for a total of just under 3,000 pages. It was 2,998 to be exact, which ends up being an average of 96 to 97 pages a day, which is close to my goal of at least 100 pages a day. And the different genres I read were horror, fantasy, sci-fi classic, and then a historical romance that pretended to be a horror. So we'll get started with my least favorite to most favorite. First one is Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. And this is marketed as horror, however, it's more of a Western historical romance. I would liken it to somewhat of a Romeo and Juliet story. Doesn't end the same, but it kind of gave me those same vibes. And this is set on the Texas-Mexico border in the mid-1800s. It has very light horror elements sprinkled in. I definitely wanted more of the vampires. Now the vampires are not your typical vampires because it's Mexican-based. They actually are called El Cuco. And the El Cuco are more like the Bogeymen, monsters, shapeshifters, something like that. Now we all know here that I am not a romance girly, so I'm quite surprised by myself that I did not DNF this. I would say I would attribute that to the beautiful writing, and it was very easy to read. I just read it so fast, which is surprising to me because again, I'm not a huge romance reader at all. On this one we follow Nina and Nestor, and they were like childhood sweethearts. And this is not a spoiler, this is on the synopsis. Nina gets attacked by the vampires. He brings her back home, and to be saved, he thinks that she ends up dying, and her father is all mad at him, so he takes off like a coward, and apparently he's gone for several years. I don't remember exactly how many, but it's quite a bit. And eventually he comes back because their ranch and their whole area is kind of being attacked by the vampires, and so he's going there to help them protect their ranch and just the area in general. And so he comes back there and he finds out, oh wow, Nina's actually still alive. That was something hard for me to believe because really, you're gone for that long, your childhood sweethearts, everybody knows this, but nobody on either side of the family or none of the friends ever told him that she was still alive. But anyway, it's their journey. There's some vampires sprinkled in there a little bit. Not enough though, in my opinion. The one positive thing I would say is I learned how to spell a Spanish word that I've always known how to say, but I didn't know how to spell it because I've heard it my whole life. My tia would always say it while she was driving. So context clues, I could tell that it was because of shock, surprise, somebody cuts you off and she'd say, hijola. And I was always wondering how to spell that because I always knew how to say it. The word is in the book. So I was like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. I finally learned how to spell that word. Another positive thing is the beautiful cover. This is just a stunning cover. Though I did feel misled because they said it was horror, I still gave it 3 stars. And if you are a romance girly, I would say you would probably enjoy this a lot more than I did. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this is 363 pages. Next book on my list, another 3-star, and this is Counterweight by Djuna. This is actually a sci-fi novella. Well, it says novel on the front, but I kind of consider it a novella. I looked on the Google God machine, and it says that a novella is 100 pages or less, but I would consider, and I've seen a lot of other people consider anything under 200 pages to be a novella, so that's what I'm going with. And this is 156 pages. So this is a psychological thriller. It's a tale of political intrigue, political unrest, unsolved mysteries, and the building of a space elevator. And there's fake identities, there's neuro implants that they call worms, and there's also old political grievances. So there's a lot of like drama going on with that aspect. With the space elevator, to help balance it, they have this thing, the counterweight. And this is really cool, like eyeball. And they basically fill this with just a bunch of junk. So they just send all their garbage up there and they pack it full of stuff. And it's not just junk that's up there, because the former CEO who has passed away, they take his fragmented memories and they also mix it in there with the junk. Now, this is really valuable information, and just a few different factions know of this, and they are rivaling it out to try to gain access to it because it's really valuable information, and it basically will determine the future of not only the business but humanity itself. This is part cyberpunk, part hard-boiled detective, and also a parable for South Koreans' ambition. And this is written by a Korean author. It's translated from the Korean. And what's funny about this is in the back here, you look at the author's photo, and it's a little stuffed bunny rabbit. And I was like, well, what's that about? So I look it up, and apparently this is a prominent sci-fi author in Korea, in South Korea. However, they keep their identity basically hidden. You don't really know who it is, but they're still a prominent author. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And my next 3-star, this is a well-beloved book. However, I did not feel the same. Now, maybe it's because expectations were set too high. I don't know. But another 3-star book for me was, yes, I know. The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Now, I was expecting to love this as well. I read her other book earlier this year, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. That was a 5-star prediction from the first page, and it was. That's an all-time favorite book of mine. Unfortunately, this one is not. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with this. We have Dr. Montague, who is going to go check out this supposed haunted house, and he's going to document this phenomenon. So he invites 4 other guests to go there with him, and things transpire from there. Now, honestly, I don't really remember a whole lot about this book because it was a little boring for me. I was just waiting for something to happen, and it felt like it never did. And I understand the whole like quiet creep. Shirley Jackson is really good with that, where something is a little off, but you're not quite sure what, and it slowly builds. So I'm okay with that. It's just this in general did not keep me interested. I would say the most interesting thing about this book, which I just noticed when I was prepping for this video, is I got the Penguin Deluxe version so it would match We Have Always Lived in the Castle. So it has the French flaps and the deckled edges as well. But what's interesting is if you take the French flaps and connect them, it continues the picture, the artwork. So basically the artwork goes all the way around. So that's pretty cool. 5 stars on the cover design, 3-star on the content. Now, I promise I did read some really good books in August. We're just not quite there yet. So the next book, the next 3-star book that I have is The Stranger by Albert Camus. This is translated from the French. This is a classic, 123 pages. Oh, of course, I forgot again, Haunting of Hill House. This edition is 233 pages. Okay, back to The Stranger. So this is about an ordinary man who somehow gets drawn into murdering someone. And this book explores his internal battle with that. This was just okay. I don't know. I think I was expecting a lot more with how highly acclaimed it is. I was kind of expecting more, and it's such a well-known classic. Maybe I just don't get it. Or maybe this is a case where something is lost in translation. Similar to The Haunting of Hill House, this just did not live up to the hype for me. The only reason why I put it just a smidge above The Haunting of Hill House is because in it he references the Greek myth of Sisyphus, which I'm a fan of in general. And actually, Albert Camus, he has a book specifically about Sisyphus, which I am planning on reading. This next book is rated a little bit higher at 3.5 stars, and that is Sweetblood by Pete Hautman. And this is a horror, kind of like a horror light. This is 180 pages. And the glare, oh, there we go. Now, this is about a main character who is diabetic, and she has an interesting theory about the early vampires, and she thinks that the early vampires were actually diabetics. She is on chat rooms online, and she somehow gets involved with a self-proclaimed real vampire. So then she gets caught up in late night parties and the goth subculture. So if you're a fan of like the 90s, I think this is set in the 90s, if I'm remembering correctly. Or maybe that's just like wishful thinking, I don't know. But if you have like blood sugar issues like I do, I'm not diagnosed diabetic, but I do have issues with low and high blood sugar. And I was totally into the goth subculture. So if you like either of those things, I think you could enjoy it. However, I will say one thing that made me uncomfortable is the self-proclaimed real vampire that she ends up meeting. He's like, I think he's like in his 40s or something like that. And he's inviting minors, like teenagers, to his house for these late night parties. So now nothing happens. I will let you know that nothing bad happens with that. But just the fact that you have this 30, 40-year-old something guy like browsing the chat rooms and luring like teenagers to his house for these parties is just a little weird to me. But the one thing that I love about this book is the cover. You can't really tell. Yeah, the lighting is not great. But this is actually like a dark purple color. This is red. This is pink. So I thought that was kind of cute. Next up, I have a couple 4-star books. And the first one is The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. And this is a fantasy. And this is 463 pages. So this is on the larger side. I think it's either the largest one I read or the second largest one I read. And in this, we have a main character who's called a midnight merchant. She hunts and sells illegal magic. And she does so with the help of her Jinn bodyguard. Now, early in the story, she ends up saving the life of this cowardly prince, and that catches the attention of his father, who's a really powerful sultan, and he ends up blackmailing her into getting her to go hunt down this ancient artifact that has really powerful magic. And with this ancient artifact, he's going to be able to revive their barren land with Jinn blood. So what happens when they spill Jinn blood is that is what makes everything green and lush. And this is in the desert, so that's something that's really important for them to do. Now, she goes on a journey with her Jinn bodyguard. There's action, adventure. I would say if you're not really big into like quest, adventure, journey stories, you probably won't like this too much because that is pretty much the whole book. So something that I thought was really fun with this book was in between the current timeline, you get little bits of like Jinn folklore interspersed with it, and it's on what looks like a scroll. So that's the first one. So similar to if you've read The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty, she does something similar. This is a first book in a trilogy, and I did look up online that the second book is scheduled to come out in February, and that's The Ashfire King, and that's coming out February 2024. My next 4-star book is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is 192 pages. Pretty sure we all know what this is about. We have Dr. Frankenstein, who animates inanimate objects. He basically takes dead body parts, puts them all together. Then he has the creature, and he's like, oh, right on, I've created life. Time to go on a trip. And he takes off. And he just like goes on a trip. He goes out of town. And he abandons the creature. Well, something really bad happens when he does that. And he doesn't find out until he comes back. And he doesn't make the situation any better. In fact, he makes it a lot worse. And so you're left wondering, well, who is the real monster? Is it the doctor? Or is it the creature who's really innocent, who didn't ask to be born? In fact, he asked for friendship, family, companionship, but he was denied it by the doctor. So like the creature is asking for these things and the doctor's just straight up denying it, or he's just like messing with them, makes him think that he's gonna help him out, but then he doesn't, and he like ditches him again. Anyway, doctor, really annoying. What a terrible human being. But in regards to the story itself, it's beautiful writing, pure poetry in my opinion. And I also learned a few new words, so that's cool. And while this is pretty accessible, I think this is a classic that you should read. It's like one of the ones that you should read just to have, to know the story for real and not just have the pop culture idea in your head. However, if you're not a fan of like monologues, the creature, when the instance when the doctor comes back, and the creature's like, hey, dude, sit down. Let me tell you about the story. Let me tell you all about what happened when you were gone. Well, that story lasts 37 pages. That's right, 37 pages of the creature talking at the doctor to tell him what happened when he was gone. So if you're not really a fan of that, your eyes may glaze over, maybe you'll fall asleep. But I was able to get through it. And I think this will be one that I reread. Not anytime soon, but eventually, maybe next year sometime again. I always forget to say, I don't know, maybe I did. 192 pages. Next up, we have my 4.5-star book, and that's A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This is a horror, and it's 284 pages. And I do recommend this edition in particular. It's called the PS edition, and it will have it on the bottom corners here, and then also on the spine. So when you see that, that means it has extra stuff in the back, so like insights and interviews that gives you further clarification on the contents of the book. Now in this book, we have just a normal suburban family, but then one of their two daughters starts exhibiting what may be signs of schizophrenia. They take her to the doctor, they can't get any help, but also the father's been out of work for a while, so he's also short on money. Then they try to get the priest to help. And they're like, wow, this is just crazy. We need more help. What are we going to do? And they can't figure out whether she actually has some kind of mental illness, whether she's acting out or faking it, or is she really possessed? So for some reason, the father thinks it's a good idea to be the star of a reality TV show. This way he gets money to help her. Well, things get a little unhinged. Now, interspersed between that current timeline, we also have an interview with the other sister. So you get both of those kind of building together. And this is a really good psychological horror with a lot of nods to other horror movies and horror novels. One horror novel in particular, which I had suspected, and then when I got to the end with when they have like the extra stuff in the back, it explained that that was indeed the book I was thinking of. So this was a really fun one. I would recommend it. Okay, my last 3 books are all 5-star all-time favorites. So I'm very excited to talk about these ones. The first one is Full Tilt by Neal Shusterman. And this is 201 pages, and this is horror, or like a psychological thriller horror. In this book, we have 2 brothers. We have Blake, who's the older, more responsible brother, and then we have Quinn, the younger brother, who is more of a thrill seeker. And then one day, they get invited to go to this phantom carnival that traps their customers forever. However, there is a way out of it. So what Blake has to do is he has to ride 7 deadly rides in order to save his brother and for both of them to get out. Now, what's interesting about these rides is they're not just your normal carnival rides. They each target a specific fear of that individual. So you could have multiple people on this one ride, but they all kind of have different experiences because of their own fears, insecurities, whatever they have going on. So this book is really good at exploring that fear. It goes over topics like insecurities, loss, grief, and especially guilt. The rides are trippy. This was definitely a page turner. I read this so fast. I couldn't wait to read it. I would also think about it when I wasn't reading it. But It's not just a trippy carnival because it really does explore those deeper topics. And as I mentioned in my unhaul video, my last video, I am not a huge proponent of public education. There's a whole thing with that. But if you're gonna make somebody read a book, I highly recommend that school kids read this book. I say like junior high, high school. I can definitely see how this book has won awards. If you don't normally like quest adventure stories, I would say you'd probably actually enjoy this one because it's like a different twist on it. And I just have a few quotes that I would like to share with you. And the first quote, I've always suspected that my life, maybe everyone's life, is like an hourglass in which the past and the future converge on a single point in time, that narrow channel where the sands pass, a single event that defines who you are. Here was a moment not of blind helplessness, but of decision. Everything could rest in the balance of the choice I now made. The next one. They say you never know who's the real hero and who's the real coward until you're looking death in the face. I've always been afraid of plenty of things, but fear isn't what makes you a coward. It's how depraved your heart becomes when fear gets pumped through it. And the next one. It's not walls that make a prison, but the willingness of the prisoners. These rides were built on the broken, resigned spirits of those trapped here, but without them, the rides couldn't hold. And the next one. I will never forget the works. They will live on in my nightmares. I will feel its grinding metallic teeth every time I see scenes of war, or a plane crash, or some other disaster on the news, too terrible to watch but too riveting to look away from. I will see in those things the dark clockwork that gets built gear by gear out of our dying dreams and our desperate fears. We are the ones who built it. And last one. Reality bends and twists to make room for anything, but in return, the real world demands an explanation for all things. And when there is no explanation, it's obliged to create one. Highly, highly recommend this book. I think everybody should read this book. Ages 12 and up. And my next 5-star all-time favorite read is actually a short story collection. And that is At Home with the Horrors by Sammy Scott. And this is 337 pages. And this is a collection of 14 stories. So each story is about 10 to 20 pages each. And in this book, he explores the natural and the supernatural. He starts out with just mundane, everyday things, and then they devolve into madness and terror. Some of the stories include a lonely woman who finds an unlikely companion when she discovers her new house is haunted. And another story, a couple's mundane argument quickly evolves into a night of terror. That one's one of my favorites. And another story, a wife who finds herself the victim of her husband's prank when he launches a YouTube channel, and that one is creepy. Another one, an antisocial teenager who encounters a new mysterious world when he starts peeping into neighborhood homes. And that one did not go the way I thought it was going to, and was pleasantly surprised. I really enjoyed that one. And one of my favorites is a mourning widow who gets daily calls from her deceased husband. Another story is a happily married man who messages an old flame on Facebook who doesn't really remember him. And things get really weird. And the last story is a novella that's about 28 pages. And in that one, we have a librarian who ends up finding a mysterious little book in their Dropbox, and, well, let's just say it's not good that that happened. So the titles of my favorites were What We Have Here, Teresa, Blackbird, The Sisters, Rebirth, Scared Mary, and Emil Bones. This is one of the first short story collections that I've read recently. It's really changed my mind on reading short stories, and I kind of developed a good way, I think, of reading short stories. A common complaint that I hear from a lot of people is they have a hard time like reading the whole thing through, and I would recommend not doing that. So what I started doing is I have maybe the 10 books that I want to read for the month, And then in this book, for example, there's 14 short stories. So what I did is I basically pace it out to, I read a book, read a short story, read a book, read a short story. If those books are around 200 pages, then that pacing works pretty well. With some of the books, they were closer to 400 pages, and so with those, I would get to the halfway mark, read a short story, and then finish the book, another short story. So basically about every 200 pages of a book I'd read, or I'd finish a book, short story. So then by the end of the month, I read my 10 books or 9 books or whatever, and the short story collection. Also, this works well for me because I do read a lot of other genres, but my favorite is horror. But I don't want to only read horror. So this way, I still get a little taste of the horror stories without only reading horror novels. So that way I can read a sci-fi and then a horror short story, and then read a fantasy and then a horror short story. So that may be something that you could try if you were struggling with reading short stories. Okay, and my number one favorite book of the month, oh my goodness, I love this book so much, and that is The Mary Shelley Club by Goldy Moldavsky. And I opened up this video with a quote from this book. Obviously, this is inspired by Frankenstein and Mary Shelley. And in this book, we have a horror club at a high school, and they play pranks on people that are based on horror movies or horror tropes. And we have this new girl at school, and she somehow gets wrapped up into a prank. She catches the attention of the horror club, and they kind of bring her into their club with them. And they do these pranks, and they call them fear tests, and they just keep escalating, and they actually get deadly. And they discover that there's actually a killer on the loose, and they don't know, like, is this part of a prank or is an actual killer outside targeting the group? And Rachel also has some dark secrets in her past, and so she starts wondering if it has to do with that. The final twist is really fun, in my opinion, and I had just fun throughout the whole book. This is definitely dark humor. I think I forgot to mention that this is like a YA horror, and it's 466 pages. But I read this in like 3 or 4 days. On the back, it's described as pulpy and page-turning and suspenseful, and I definitely agree with that. They also said it was like a bit like Scream and a bit like Gossip Girl. Now, I don't know if I've ever actually watched Scream, although I'm very familiar with the story, and I've never watched Gossip Girl, but I would agree with that. Just from what I know about those movies or the show, I think Gossip Girl is a show, just what I know from those, I would say that's pretty accurate. Also, it reminded me of The Secret History in regards to their club, because they have a secret group that's doing possibly questionable things, and also the setting with it being at a school. And in relation to Frankenstein, this book poses a couple questions. Who is the real monster? And how did they get that way? Okay guys, that'll do it for my August wrap up. If you've made it to the end, please leave a knife in the comments, like here, to represent my favorite book of the month, The Mary Shelley Club. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.